Just a heads up, Mike Dowd said that he will be unable to attend today's meeting. Apparently, the LVEDC, scheduled their meeting in concurrence with our meeting. So it looks like, as far as Human Services, this might be it. Myself, I'm it. So,
who is the new committee?
Actually, it's the old committee.
Oh, it is the.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
Mike Dowd, Peg Ferraro, Ron Engel, and myself.
Okay.
And so, at this time, I'll call to order the January 20th Human Services Committee, and open up to the floor for any statements, public input on tonight's agenda. Let the record show that nobody stepped forward, no one requested any input. Must mean that everything's going well, Ross. Nobody's criticizing anything. Today's topic is to review the closure of the Allentown State Hospital. And once again, it's our esteemed guest, Mr. Ross Marcus.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Last committee meeting, you asked for an update on the closure of the Allentown State Hospital at tonight's meeting, so we came prepared for the topic. I'll step aside. Kathleen Kelly, who's the Administrator of Mental Health Early Intervention and Developmental Programs Division, Wendy Heatley, who administers the mental health part of that division, and Jim Gillen, who's our peer worker, will actually be making the presentation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kathleen.
Tom, a lot of this is going to be repetitious for you since you were on our board, but maybe John will.
I'm always willing to.
You're always willing to learn. So let me start, if I may, with, first of all, thank you very much for your interest. This has been a very interesting, demanding, exciting project for us. It's taken a lot of staff time, but we've had what I think is an excellent outcome, with many new programs that were developed, and Wendy and Jim will go into some detail about those, and a new life beginning for about 54 of our consumers who were at the state hospital. Just by way of a little background, the closure was announced by the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services in the early part of the year. I think it was February we had a meeting. Even though there were some rumors prior to that, nothing was official until the Deputy Secretary came down and called all 5 of the counties. The Allentown State Hospital, it served Lehigh, Northampton, as well as Carbon-Monroe Pike, the joinder to the north of us. And the time frame for the closure was very aggressive. We were told that the doors would close at the end of the year. We know that a couple of other hospitals had been closed by this administration, and the time frame had been a little bit more generous. So we were aware up front that this was going to be a challenge for us, but we were determined to meet that challenge. I also want to let you know that this is part of what is called CHIP, which is the Community Hospital Integration Project program, and the extra P is to differentiate it from the Children's CHIP.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's one of those silly acronyms. This is the 4th CHIP. CHIP is an opportunity and a mechanism for the state to close state hospital beds, to do what they call right-sizing, which is to usually maybe shift and downsize some of the existing hospitals in the state of Pennsylvania. I think we're down now to 6. And over the years, they've given counties the opportunity to close some beds in your catchment area, in your bed cap, and then take funding from those closure of those beds out into the community to develop services, and also, of course, then to discharge those consumers who were in those beds. This was our 4th CHIP. So this is something we've done before. and we've done large projects before. Our first CHIP we did in 1994, and that was a project we did with Lehigh County, and we discharged 15 consumers into the community. Then again in 97, we did a very large one. Again, we did this in cooperation with Lehigh County, and each county discharged 40 consumers into the community. Then in that was in 97. 2001, what was CHIP 3, we discharged 10 consumers, and then the closure was the last. We believe, as a mental health program, that people with serious mental illness can live successfully in the community with the proper supports. We feel that their quality of life can be greatly enhanced. And our goal was to see that that occurred, but also to be mindful of the health and safety issues. Anytime we develop programs, residential programs in the community, of course, that's something that we're always very careful about. So we had experience. We learned through each of our previous CHIPs how we just gained some knowledge in how to do it. This is not to say that those were the only times that we discharged people from the state hospital, because obviously people come and go all the time. Mental illness, serious mental illness is of an episodic nature in that people will sometimes need to go into an inpatient setting for some treatment and then hopefully come out again in a short period of time into the community. So with that said, we started I would say in February, we had our census was, I think, 54 consumers who were at the hospital at that time.
That whole huge campus, only 54?
Well, in the hospital at that time, there were 172.
Okay.
54 were ours. I don't know. Wendy, do you remember?
I don't know how many at Lehigh.
Yeah, I think Harbin Monroe Pike might have had under 20, and so the rest of them were Lehigh County.
When I visited there, it had that kind of empty feeling. So, I mean, when you see it, it looks monstrous, but when you realize that it's hardly used, that's probably why they decided to close it down.
Right. Well, if you read back in the history, and it is really fascinating, I think at the height of the census, there were close to 3,000 people who were there. And have you ever driven back there?
Oh, yeah. Right.
Yeah.
It's in East Downtown.
Right. So it's just a huge campus, but most of it was closed already and, kind of overgrown. So really there were only 2 or 3 buildings that were used. So when we started, as I said, we had 54 consumers, and we had done a negotiation with the state office and had heard how much funding would be assigned to the closure, and did some negotiation with the other 4 counties about that, and then started. We put into place a team in our office. We engaged our advisory board. We wanted to make sure that we had families and consumers and had heard from them. And, of course, one of the things, as I mentioned before, that we've learned over these years of doing these 4 CHIP was that we had a fairly good sense of what consumers would like in a residential setting, and I'll focus on that because I think what we learned that people want to have their own bedrooms. People don't like to double up. People would prefer, of course, to have their own apartments. So things that are very natural to all of us, we certainly heard those same kinds of messages from our consumers. So our goal was to try and make sure that whatever we developed was going to be something that we would either be comfortable ourselves if we needed to live in that type of a setting, or a family member. So that was kind of our overarching goal. We issued, Wendy and Jim will talk about the kinds of programming we did. We did issue proposals. We had a committee. Each of the programs that was developed, we used the committee, which included consumers, family members, representatives from NAMI, and, of course, county staff, and had a lengthy review process, and then made the awards. So I'd like to stop now, and we'll certainly have time for questions, and then ask Jim and Wendy to give you a little bit more information, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Yes?
Hello. I'm just going to start with a few statistics about the closure. Northampton County discharged 43 CHIP individuals from Allentown State Hospital in a little over 10 months. The 44th person will be discharged from Wernersville later this year. I know all of these individuals and was personally involved in almost every aspect of their discharge planning. The average length of stay for those discharged was 5.9 years at the hospital. The person with the longest length of stay was at ASH for 32 consecutive years. Another individual had gone into ASH at the age of 5, and while this person had a few short stints in the community, overall spent more than 60 years of her life at Allentown State Hospital. And now I'm just going to have Jim Gillen, our peer worker from Recovery Partnership, talk to you a little bit about some of our closure highlights.
Thank you, Wendy. Good evening. We would like to acknowledge a couple of our closure highlights. Early on in the closure process, we were able to successfully place Huckleberry the Beagle with her owner in one of our group homes. Huckleberry and all 8 residents of that home are quite pleased with the arrangement. Another story involves a very caring landlord and his wife. More often than not, we are faced with opposition when we try to start up a new program in a neighborhood. Often, people are misinformed about persons with mental illness and are unnecessarily afraid. Well, in this case, it was quite the opposite. Our landlord worked very hard to have the home safe, clean, and ready for our ladies. He also built a wheelchair ramp for the one resident. He and his wife come over occasionally and visit with the ladies and have warmly accepted them into their lives. The last highlight is that I personally would like to acknowledge Northampton County for including me as a partner in all aspects of the county mental health planning process. I have 40 years of experience as a human service professional, a mental health consumer, and a provider of mental health services, and it is my pleasure to share my knowledge with Northampton County and the community. Thank you.
And now I'm just going to add just a few more human stories so that everyone understands how our folks have been impacted positively by this closure. Most of our folks wanted to come out of the state hospital. They couldn't wait. But there were a few people that were very, very afraid and terrified at the idea of coming out into the community, especially after having been at the state hospital for so long. One lady in particular was certain that something terrible would happen to her if she moved into the community. Her paranoia, coupled with delusions, held her hostage with fear. And, you know, up until 2 days before her discharge, she was just telling me, "Why are you doing this to me? Why are you making me go live in this house?" She really didn't want to leave. And, you know, we kept reassuring her and, you know, showed her the home. And she would come around a little bit, but she was still very fearful. And then Kathy Cromer, our new CHIP coordinator, and I had gone up. She had been there maybe 2 or 3 days in her new home, and we went up to visit her and the other residents. And when she saw us, she came across the living room with this huge smile on her face. And she hugged both of us and said, "I love my new house. I love it here." And her family told us, they told Kathy that this is the happiest they had ever seen their sister in her entire life. That's just one story. Our folks in general are doing very well, and they're experiencing a lot of firsts that many things that you and I take for granted. People are going to the store and helping pick out food they will eat for their meals. Individuals are assisting with preparing meals. One gentleman made and frosted his first cake. At the hospital, folks were handed a tray of food and had relatively little say over what they were going to eat. So this is a big deal to them to be able to choose these things. One of the things that we made sure of, and this was something that was requested time and time again in individual plans, was that folks wanted their own rooms. So we made sure in all of our residential programs that people would have their own rooms. And at the hospital, it was 4 to 1 room. That was typical. And during the day, because of safety reasons, the hospital would have to close off the dorm area. So if somebody wanted to take a nap, they couldn't go back to their room and take a nap. So you'd find people laying in the hallway, If they were lucky, they got one of those hard vinyl couches to take a nap on. But in our homes, they can go lay down in their own bed whenever they want to take a nap. Or they might choose to sit in a soft chair and watch a TV that they don't have to share with 30 other people on a unit. Let's see, what else? Okay. Oh, okay. A lot of things, I found out a lot of, I talked to one of our coordinators of one of our new programs yesterday, so she filled me in on what some of the residents were doing. So a lot of these things actually really did happen yesterday. One of our folks signed up at one of our local hospitals to be a volunteer. And many of our folks are working, going to church, visiting family and friends. Some folks are going to our drop-in centers and clubhouses. The individual that I referenced earlier that had spent over 60 years in the state hospital yesterday successfully completed our leadership training. We held this training at our Recovery Partnership office. This training is for our mental health consumers that want to learn how to be They want to learn how to be on advisory and governing boards and be effective members of those boards. And she did successfully complete that training. Also yesterday, almost every member of our long-term structured residence, which is basically our most highly structured, highly supervised program that we have out in the community for folks that are very chronic and very seriously mentally ill, they interviewed one of their new potential staff members together and asked questions that you and I would ask, like, where did you get your degree? And what type of degree do you have? Where have you worked before? Why do you want to work here? And they were very respectful and very involved. This is just one example of how our providers are embracing opportunities to involve our individuals in their care and their treatment. And as part of the monitoring process, Kathy, our CHIP coordinator, myself, and Jim, our peer worker, and Eric, our CHIP case manager, we all get to go out to these homes, and we get to witness our folks thriving in these homes filled with love and choice and activity. We feel very fortunate to be a part of this process and witness these transformations. There are setbacks for folks at times. This is to be expected. This is life. But it is life in the community, and it's not a hospital. One thing I just wanted to share with you before I came here, I was reading some reports from Recovery Partnership, which is our local consumer family satisfaction team. And they go out to all of our programs, all of our residential programs and our ACT teams, and they interview folks to see if they're satisfied with services and help them resolve any issues with our providers. And this gentleman, who had been in the state hospital over 25 years, this is what he had to say. He said, "I really like living here. The view is beautiful, and the kitchen is really nice. I can make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich whenever I want." Things you and I take for granted. So, I think we're doing a real good thing here for these folks.
I should add that both Wendy and Jim were focusing on some of the anecdotal stories because Mike Dowd had asked for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wanted to take a few minutes and just let you know some of the programming that we did develop that you might be interested in. One of the good things about CHIP is that it allows you not only to provide a service package for one individual consumer, but that you can build infrastructure. And so each time of those 4 CHIPs, we've been able to put into place services that will serve hundreds of people, not just the person, the 15 or the 10 or the 40 who have been discharged. For an example, I think in our second CHIP, we developed what we call a warm line, which is just that. It's not a hotline, but it's a telephone 24 hours a day, every day. It allows someone who just might have the need to talk to another consumer or talk to a professional, don't need crisis, and they can do that. And so we developed that kind of a service, and we enhanced our crisis services and clubhouses and employment-based services and things of that nature. For this particular project, of course, because we had a large number of consumers, and we never have enough appropriate housing for people with mental illness. No question about it. Wendy's staff do a survey every year. We send it out to all of our providers. They ask, trying to determine where are people living, whether it's adequate, whether they're doubling up with families, similar to what the Community Action Committee does for the homeless populations.
I'm just going to stop you right there. Have you talked with the Housing Authority at all?
Oh,
in that
absolutely.
regard?
Yeah, we do. We actually have a committee, and our housing authority, both the city and the county, are part of that group, and we meet with them
Yeah, because
monthly.
I would think that
Yeah.
would be the first place that
Oh,
I would look
absolutely.
at. I think you need to put some pressure on
And
them.
we do, and we've gotten actually we've developed a nice relationship with Northampton County Housing Authority. Hi, Mike. And Bethlehem. So housing is critical, and the last year's survey, I don't have the number right here, but I believe there were 183 people who still require housing, who are either in substandard, inappropriate, doubling up, homeless situations. And that was out of a survey of about 800 consumers. So the need is really quite critical. And we are working with the housing authorities. We're working with the Bethlehem area Moravians. We now have done 3 projects with the Moravians. The first one we did was a HUD project. So we brought in funding to develop a program in the city of Bethlehem that has 8 apartments in it. And funding came from HUD. Funding came from our Health Choices reinvestment program, from the county-based program, from the city of Bethlehem, and from the Moravians. So it was a really nice mixture of funding, and that program's been in place 4 years? Yeah, maybe 4 years. And we have consumers, of course, there. And that is actually called Moravian 4. So just as all the Moravian buildings are numbered, and now we have Moravian 5 and Moravian 6, because 2 of the housing programs that we developed, we did with the help of the Moravians, and they now manage the programs. So one is the program Wendy mentioned a minute ago, the long-term structured residence, which is our most heavily staffed program. That is actually, I believe, 6?
8.
Oh, was it 8? Moravian 8?
Oh, I thought you
No.
People were
It's
there,
Moravian
I'm
6,
sorry.
though, right? Yeah,
Maybe
that's
6.
no 6. And then Moravian 5 is a really nice program where it's a beautiful residential home that actually used to be owned by, is it RCN? Is that the TV, like Service Electric? I have Service Electric, so I don't know what the other one is.
have
Whatever
RCN.
that other one is. Or, what is it?
I have RCN. I
Oh,
don't
that's
know.
it. Well, anyway, he's the owner, and so it was a really beautiful home, but had been vacant for a long time. And so it's in Hanover Township. But we were able to, anyway, to purchase that using Health Choices
I think it
reinvestment
used to be
dollars.
Twin County Cable, was that?
Oh, that's what it was. That's right. That's what it was. You're right. But anyway, we were able to have like 4 suites so that 4 individual consumers have their own sitting room and bathroom and a much more independent type of setting. And in addition to that, we have 2 respite beds that we can use for people who might just need a break from wherever they are. So those are the kinds of programs that we developed. We did 2 3-person homes, and one of them really has special services for people who are medically complex. So we did realize that some of the consumers who were at the hospital were older or just had chronic medical conditions, some in wheelchairs. And so we were able to develop programming around them so that they could not have to go to a nursing home and could come out into the community. So that was really nice. So we have 2 3-person homes, 2 4-person homes, the 8-person long-term structured residence Wendy mentioned. We also added 2 beds to an existing housing program that we had. And then we converted another program, something called CRR, which is a program. It's a residential program. It also has some rehabilitation attached to it. But it's short-term. It's usually up to like 6 months. And so we converted that. We don't find that we have that much use for that type of programming anymore, and so we made it into a little bit more intensive program so someone who is in there can live there forever. What we tried to do with our housing is bring services to the person, and so we try to structure some of the housing, we call it supported housing, so that sometimes someone needs more and then they need less. They can move. We certainly do have people who move out into less structured places, independent living, independent apartments. People do progress, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they continue to need that kind of structure, and they can stay in these programs. So that's worked really well. We also were able to start a drop-in center in Easton. We had a drop-in center. We have a very successful one in Bethlehem. But the consumers in Easton have asked for one for a long time, and we never really had the funding for it, so we were able to do that. And we expanded our hours in Bethlehem, so now we have weekend hours, and it's more accessible to people. And I think, we also have, this is another Moravian project. We had purchased a row home in Bethlehem, and it had commercial space on the front, which on the first floor, which was rented out to one of our providers, and it had a small apartment on the second. But we converted those to be 2 apartments, and now we have 2 independent living settings for two more consumers. And then the last thing we developed was what we call a lodge program, and there actually was a nice article in the paper about that. It is you purchase a building or you rent a building, and the consumers decide what kind of business they want to run out of that setting. In that building, you might have 1 or 2 apartments so that if people need some supervision, they can live actually in the lodge building. But mostly it affords the opportunity to have rental apartments for people in that community, and then they come and they use the lodge. So we started one of those programs, and that will serve at a minimum 12 consumers. And we have a setting on the south side. So what we really tried to do was take a look at where they're successful, what we've learned over all these years in doing these discharges and listening to consumers, and to try and build a continuum. So I think that's where we are at this point. Unfortunately, Mike, we had a lot of stories earlier, but okay, that'll be good. Are there any questions? Is there anything else in programming or?
No, you covered it, Kathy.
Good. Okay. Anything you want to ask, or anything else I can share with you?
Well, first of all, I'm very impressed. Wendy, it takes a special person to do what you do, and you've been here a couple times now, and I've been impressed both times. So, kudos to you. I work with special education teachers sometimes, and I think what you do is similar. I know I couldn't do it, but for people like you that work with mentally challenged and people with disabilities like that, it's really wonderful. So good job. A couple things I had. One was, and maybe I've brought this up before, but zoning and safety and how do you locate residents in, say, a residential community without creating concerns, issues?
Well, you don't always. I mean, in all the years I've been here, we certainly have had our challenges and our battles with communities. And some of you were here when we had some fairly serious ones. What we try to do, however, is first of all we need to decide what is it that we need. And so if it's a small home, for instance, someone for the 3-person, certainly we want to go in a residential community, but we're very careful. We want to be, first of all, we're good neighbors. And I really mean that. We have providers, they're selected, as I mentioned earlier, through a request for proposal process. They're vetted carefully. They have extensive experience. Many of them are in many different counties and do this a lot. And so they know how to be a good neighbor. And what I have said personally at hearings, when someone has said, in often a very uncomfortable for me to listen to way, their complaints and concerns about the people who are going to live in these homes, I've never been able to pick my neighbors. And over the years, I've had some pretty bad neighbors. So here, we're coming and saying, this is who we are, and this is what we will bring to this home. We will have it staffed. It will be monitored. Some of them are licensed, and we want to be a good neighbor. Our providers will engage the community. Oftentimes, they'll try and volunteer to do, if there happens to be an elderly person next door. I certainly know of some of our group homes where they'll do snow shoveling, or they'll actually do some outreach to the neighbors. If it's going to be a larger home, and we have a couple, as I mentioned, we have several 8-person homes, we will then look for a setting that is a bit more rural, that has some property around it. That's what we will certainly try to find. And we've been successful in doing that. So we have, some might have a couple of acres around it. Some might not, might only have like an acre, but, there's some shrubbery, and doesn't mean that we're trying to hide, but when you bring, any time you have a big family who moves into the neighborhood, everybody's going to get a little nervous when you see, oh my God, they've got 6 kids and how noisy this is going to be. And so we, again, try to put ourselves in a very natural, normalizing thought process and say, well, who would I want to be there? And then we go to hearings, and we answer questions. And we try to be honest. We don't try to be honest. We are honest. But we try to reassure them. We are honest, Ross. We are definitely honest. We just try to reassure them about what's going to happen. And we invite them to come by, and we often, providers will have an open house. And Frank has a couple of our group homes in your neighborhood, don't you?
They're great neighbors.
See? Yeah. So that's what we do. John, I don't know if that answers the question, but we, it's not to say, though, that we have not had some very uncomfortable hearings. And we're still not finished. We have a couple of hearings left.
If you don't mind,
Oh, no,
just to
no.
add to it, that sometimes it comes down to simple miscommunication. In the closure, Kathleen and I were involved in several situations where once we got the communication part of it straightened out, it really
Right.
straightened out and seemed to smooth things over.
That's right.
Some feathers were ruffled unnecessarily, things like that. And once we got beyond that, it went much smoother. So sometimes it can be as simple as just making sure we're being clear.
Right. I absolutely agree. I mean, Pennsylvania is unique, I suppose, and maybe it's not unique, but because every township has its own zoning, you really encounter a different issue, potentially, every place you go. And we have done that. I mean, we're not only talking about people with serious mental illness in the mental health program, but in the mental retardation developmental program, we also have a lot of group homes. So you do, sometimes you're asked to do things that are frankly against the law. The Fair Housing Act is very clear. Up to three unrelated persons may live together in a home, and you don't have to tell anybody that. But because we're there, that sometimes they will ask us to call ourselves a group home, maybe put into place some things that we don't necessarily have to. But we try to be accommodating. Many of our providers, as I said, are very experienced. They're big providers. And some of them have had to take it through legal channels for some some serious zoning issues. And in the end, we usually win because, again, the law is on our side, but that's our last resort. We certainly don't want to go there. So our approach is go to the hearing, be honest, be friendly, stay late, say to the woman who just said all kinds of terrible, nasty things, what can I tell you to help you understand, and can I reassure you? And that's the approach that we take.
What role do families play in placement, location? What's that dynamic that exists?
They actually, they definitely have a role. Each person who was discharged had what we call a community support plan, and it was a series of meetings to develop this plan, and each person was supposed to have up to 3 meetings. And at that meeting, the family was invited, friends, any support for that person, anyone that person wanted there, advocates from the hospital, certainly hospital staff, treatment staff. And then the plan was developed after getting input from all of those people. What, as a family member, are you aware that is helpful to your family member in his life? What does the consumer want? What are the consumer's goals? Sometimes they don't match. That's something we encounter a lot. Consumers might want to be independent. Families might think that that's not going to happen. Even though these are adult children, they're not children, they're adults. And so sometimes there's that tension. But it's a process that has worked fairly well because you stay at that table and meet again and again until you come to some resolution that everyone can live with. So I would say that they have a significant role in the process. Wendy, you agree?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Jim?
They go out to the homes,
Yeah.
go on tours of the homes. They can visit whenever they want. It's very important that our consumers have their families and friends involved, and our providers ensure that that happens.
Yeah, and that's how people are successful. I mean, the things that we've learned are that if housing is critical, if you're homeless, you're not going to be in recovery from mental illness. You're going to be constantly worried about being homeless. If you're in inappropriate housing, so if you have solid, stable housing, and then the next thing, of course, is people need friends. They need treatment because they have an illness, and ideally they need a job. And when Wendy was talking about people already starting to work, sometimes volunteering is where people start. The clubhouses that we run, one in Easton, one in Bethlehem, allows people to actually come to a setting where they can learn skills, but they also can just come to the clubhouse and work in the clubhouse if they're not ready to actually go out and maybe work for the Express Times or the Morning Call or some of the sites that we have. He's not even paying attention. Oh, okay. But we do have placements. You know, we do work. The providers work with a lot of different organizations in the community and try and. Wegmans is one that's been very, very helpful in hiring people. So those are really that's what makes people successful. It's just like us, just like our kids, you know. Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things that happen when you talk about families, unfortunately, as a consumer, I know that I didn't understand my illness, and the families many times do not. And sometimes families just say, there's nothing I can do, there's no help at all that you're going to get. And one of the things that we do in our mission with my colleagues is to try to educate the families about why there's certain behaviors. And really, they're symptoms, but what we try to do is to teach the persons with the mental illness how to stay in recovery, and also with family questions. For instance, when we're doing things together in trying to place somebody, we always ask, if the parents or anybody, a significant other or others are involved, and we try to pull them in and try to educate. And another thing from Northampton County has done, along with Lehigh County, we've been doing trainings in the community to try to help stop the stigma, and we got a long way to go, because I guess we could look and see what happened in Tucson, and it really hurts me deeply to say that some of our work might fall behind because of something that happened, but really what it was an untreated human being with a mental illness, allegedly. Thank you.
I guess the last question I had relates to funding. What's your funding outlook, both state and federal level, and given recent budget constraints, especially at the state level, what do you anticipate going forward?
Well, we have received our full allocation as promised. We started with a startup for the half of the first year, last year, and now we're in the first full year. And we've already been told what our allocation will be for next year. The good thing about the CHIP dollars, they're 100%. They do not require county match at all. And that has been the case from the very first CHIP that we did. And they have never been reduced. They don't always get a COLA, but for many years they did get a COLA. Do I expect a COLA this year? No. But I have gotten, I'm not hearing anything from the state level that indicates that they're in jeopardy. It's legislation. The closure is something that is well announced. The BFO, the state budget office, is a part of it. They're some of the folks who come up with the numbers. And so also, if you think about it, through the closure, they got money, because we certainly didn't get the entire budget from the state hospital. We might have, at the 5 counties, I think we're close to about half, but that was a $35 million facility. And so there's significant funding that went back to the state. We would like to see it, of course, stay in the mental health program, but that's not going to be our decision. So I feel we're managing. We never do we have enough money? We never have enough money because the needs are great. But I do believe that our budget is solid. We're very careful with what we've spent. We've tried to leave a cushion because these are new programs, and you can be a little uncertain about staffing. You might need more staffing in one. Maybe you need less in another, but those kinds of things you'll learn as time goes by. So I think that right now we're okay. I do think that we will experience, I'm hearing a 15% cut across the OMSAS budget next year, but I'm hearing that for all of the Department of Public Welfare programs. So all 3 of our programs will probably get and that's a significant cut for us.
Yeah, I mean, the states are going to lose federal stimulus money.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely, they have already.
I think it's going to impact everybody all the way down.
It's actually happening across New Jersey all the time, and it's really
But and we're taking that into consideration. I mean, we're being very careful about how we're spending our money. We certainly do not want to jeopardize the community. We don't want to jeopardize our consumers, and so we are watching it closely. But does that answer it?
Yeah. I have some questions.
Sure.
They're basically updates from since the last time I spoke to you. Allentown State Hospital, any word on what they plan on doing with the facility?
No, because I think as we talked about at our board, the facility does not belong to the Department of Public Welfare or the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. It belongs to the General Services. And so they get to decide what happens to the property. In addition, as we talked about at our board, Lehigh County and the city are going to have a strong say in that. So where we fit in that, where we advocate, we will continue to advocate for some funding if it's sold. That's what we'd like to have. But it's totally out of our hands. But there's nothing been said. Now, just so you understand, there are 2 programs right now that are being housed at the state hospital and will for up to a year. One is a Lehigh County program because they were not able to find, it's a rather large program, and they were unable to find a location. The second one is actually one that's ours and Carbon Monroe Pike, and that's an 8-person program, which we started within about 2 months. I feel fairly confident that we'll be able to move out of there in less than a year. But right now, there are those 2 programs in the state hospital. They're letting us use the admissions building. And the providers, the state hospital is not running them. The providers that we selected in both instances are running those programs. No, actually, it's Northwestern Human Services happens to be running both. One is a personal care boarding home for Lehigh County, and ours is what's called an extended acute program.
Community services for children, the land was partitioned off.
What was the campus?
But they own the land. So when the land is sold, it will not impact
That's
community
right.
services for children.
That's right.
Portion of the west side.
Yes.
Right, the Donnelly Center and all, right.
Southwest.
Yeah. There was one mental health program, Haven House, that actually was given a deadline to leave because they were just renting.
Back in old days.
Yeah.
The December 31st date seemed to be constantly mentioned, and then all of a sudden I saw in the middle of December, there's a person standing there with a key in the middle of
Yeah,
December.
that's right.
Was that a little bit of a shock for you? Or
It was
did
a
you
shock.
notice?
Well, it wasn't that much of a shock because they warned us many months ahead of time, but it was a moving target because we were saying, oh, it's 31st, but it was really about the holidays. It was about 2 things. It was about wanting. They were juggling letting staff leave. I think they placed in new jobs within the state system, I'm going to say 85% of the staff who were at the hospital. And then I think there were a handful of people, of employees who were furloughed, but it was under 20, I think. And so they were doing a juggling act. They needed staff there to care for the people who were leaving, but then they also needed to let people go. And so as they started to close different units, it was really a numbers game. How many people did they need? How many people were left? And then what came into play were the holidays. People were taking vacations, and it was really thought that wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have people in their own home in the community for Thanksgiving would be great. That didn't happen in many instances, but certainly for the Christmas holidays. And so we just kind of said, all right, But we had our own deadline, which 2 days we were off. Maybe 2 days we were off. Right. But we made it. We were out by the 7th. So then they picked the 17th.
The other one is, I'm dating myself a little. I remember the 80s when they were closing down, where it was like the newspaper's coverage was absolutely horrible. Communities were protesting the thought of even having a group home or anything. Mm-hmm. This was kind of calm, considering that the Allentown State Ash is being closed. I thought this landmark would have created a big outcry from. There were some protests I remember from, but particularly labor, but nobody seemed to be afraid of any of the unknown. How were you able to make the difference between, it's like 30 years different, but...
Well, I think education, and I think that we've been more visible in the community. I think that there have been instances where there were issues, certainly when we started our crisis residential program in, I think that was 97. That was a terrible situation. That was in Bethlehem Township. We had neighbors who were threatening us with guns at the hearing, who sat across the street with video cameras, videotaping people's comings and goings in this house.
Actually, that sounds kind of normal where I come from. So,
well, maybe. But I think that was the extreme, and I think maybe Frank's experience is a good one. People have come to see there are more of these places in the community, and maybe because we're doing more outreach.
Good.
Well, I had the same experience with Children's Hospital. We began doing group homes, and the first couple were brutal, and subsequent to that, I think frankly, some drug were welcome in the neighborhood because they take care of the properties.
Yeah.
And police the situation really pretty well.
And I think it's really critical that we're out in the community monitoring programs so that people know we're there. And that's one of the things we stress over and over again at the hearings. This is a county-monitored program. It is a state-monitored program. There will be people like Wendy and Jim and Kathy who go out every week. Then maybe every 2 weeks. It'll change as time goes on, as the need is there. But we're watching.
I do remember that when I mentioned it was that one isolated incident in Hellertown. I remember
Yes.
the videotapes, the people getting very angry and everything, and I would get feedback as soon as they found out, wait, we have a council member in our own borough, and they would get all up in arms saying, well, how could you even let a group home come here in the borough? And I was like, wait a minute, as far as I know, that would be technically the 6th or 7th one we already have.
Right.
And when I checked with some of the municipalities' officials, technically those houses, since they are kind of rental units, and the borough are, as far as like multi-use, multi-occupancy facilities, they're some of the best cared for places there are. They're brought up in codes. That the electricity is safe in there. The people aren't just. I mean, there's a more demand on proper maintenance on their homes than some of our own homeowners
That's
place
right.
on themselves.
That's right.
So it was rather impressive to see that. Like I said, we had the one crowd that with the video cameras and everything across the street and calling the police or everything. But once it actually came to light, it realized that these are not just people or a different group. These have been our neighbors for quite a while.
Right.
And I think we just approved another group home on a zoning hearing maybe about 4 months ago. I think it was an alcoholic rehabilitation program. And I think it's rather one of the larger ones as far as the occupancy. So I know it's gone well from one extreme to very receptive. So. But I do remember, like I said, that the editorials, the papers, crime rates were going to go up. The horrible stories that were terrible back in the 80s, but now that ASH is gone, it's almost like people ask what,
Well, it's interesting, too, that the state commented that when they held a public hearing before any of this actually got underway, that was the first thing they did. And that's by law that they have to do that. They were telling us about the other closures, Mayview, and I can't remember which was the other one, Harrisburg. Hundreds of people had come to the hearing and were very angry, and, all day long there was testimony, and a lot of it very vitriolic. And I don't think we had 5 people come all day. We sat there all day waiting for people to come, and it just didn't happen. So they didn't quite we like to think it's because we've been doing this for so long that we've kind of figured out how to do it and not exactly stay under the radar, but do a good job.
It was very quiet.
Yeah.
But very productive as well. So amazing. Anybody else have any questions? Then I'd very much like to thank the ladies and gentlemen for their presentation and some of their consumer stories that they brought back from the experience.
Thank you.
Very appreciative of all the information, especially the good work that's being done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And, of course, Mr. Marcus.
What do you want for next month?
Oh, well, we'll schedule a meeting, but wow, why didn't I think of that earlier? But usually it ends up as, I don't know if Mike's coming up with any ideas.
In fact, I just ran the door, so the idea of all is empty at the moment.
Okay. What we'll do is maybe kind of think about it along the way, and then we'll make sure the proper notices go out. Thank you.
We already have heard, that's about 15%. But when we begin hearing from the state,
When the governor proposes his budget.
It's March. Is that March?
I think it's February.
Okay.
so it should be soon.
So I think word will start getting out fairly quickly, because they're going to have to put together good numbers fairly soon.
Okay. I see there's some additional people. I don't know if they came in for the Human Services Committee meeting, but I'll open up the floor once again for any closing comments or anything.
Well, thank you.
And I'll say I'll let the record show that no one came forward, and I'd just like to adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.